pleasures of life, such as the sun on our face, the sound of birds singing, and the laughter of children playing. It is also a time of growth and abundance, as crops ripen and flowers bloom. Let us embrace summertime with gratitude and joy, giving thanks to God for his provision and blessings. May we use this season to rest, recharge, connect with loved ones, and to reflect on the goodness of God in our lives. This summertime season, let's celebrate God's love in all that we do.
Well, good morning, everybody. How you doing today? Good. All right. So we're continuing our series in the Songs of Summer, and those songs are expressed in emotions that we see in the Psalms. And if you haven't read through the Psalms, like we're going through it in this series, you'll see that there are ways to express our emotions to God, and as we're learning, there's really nothing that we should hold back from him, even no matter how far away from being right we may be. So today is anger. We're going to talk about using praying in anger, and we're going to go through two examples of it. We'll go through Psalm 137, which is like open heart, let it all out, without much hope, and some unchecked anger. And then in Psalm 62, we'll go through another example of anger and how David in this psalm really responds in a way that addresses that anger, and with the idea of hope and perspective. So anger is an interesting emotion because it's not what you would call a primary emotion. It's more of a secondary emotion. I don't know if you've thought much about that, but usually you get angry for some reason, which brings up an emotion, whether it's seeing somebody belittled. Well, it might bring up that anger when you see that happen. Jesus, we saw him get angry in the temple when he watched how they had corrupted the worship and turned the house of prayer into something completely different. Right? So, but a lot of it has to do is what do we do with the anger? The anger in itself is not a problem, but it's what follows the anger that becomes a problem. So, Psalm 137, you're going to see as we go through this, there's overwhelming hurt, there's resentment, dwindled hope, and unchecked anger. And there's good reason for it, as we'll get through and get to the background of it. So this Psalm 137 starts out this way. By the rivers of Babylon we sat and we wept when we remembered Zion. Now for us, we may not, if we don't understand that background, we're saying, okay, what's going on here? So what had happened was that Babylon came in, and Joe alluded to this last week, came in and just decimated the country of Israel and Judah. And they brought all the captives from Israel into Judah and into Babylon, crushed the temple, just ruined Jerusalem. And while that, for us, that may be a blow, when we have like our homes and cities ruined, but for them, it goes far beyond that. So these are kind of the things that they wept over, and so you got to put yourselves into their shoes just a little bit here. It didn't come without, a great cost of a lot of people dying. So there's loved ones who were killed in this process. They lost everything that they owned. They were now in another country. They had no possessions. They had no home. Their captors were quite cruel, and I will spare you some of the details, or a lot of the details, but to give you an idea of how cruel they were, when they took King Zedekiah and they wanted to punish him, what they did is they made him watch as they killed his sons, and then they gouged out his eyes, so that was the last thing that he saw. Right? And that was the kind of cruelty that they were facing. And not only that, but you've lost everything that was good in your life, right? There's nothing in your life that carries over that is pleasant and blessed anymore. And the reason that this happened was because, they had it coming. Because God promised that if they didn't respond to him in the way he asked, that he was going to send the Babylonians in. This was, prophesied beforehand. So now they had to think about, regret and sin and repentance. But they really didn't have any idea about when this would end. And so their hope is really it's a bleak hope. And probably the most important thing when it comes to being a spiritual Israelite is that they didn't destroy the temple. And as we'll see, why that's important to them and why, if we lost our church building, that would not interrupt our worship. It would hurt, but we could still worship. Whereas they could not, as we'll see. So they continue, whoever this person is continues. We hung up our harps on the willows in the midst of it. Those who carried us away captive asked us a song, and those who plundered us demanded songs of joy and said, "Sing to us one of the songs of Zion," right? Not because they liked the song, but they knew if they made them sing the song, it would just crush them. So it was an act of cruelty by the Babylonians. So you can see, as if you put yourself in their position, how all the emotions you have to deal with. You have resentment, you have anger at your captives, you have regret. So all the emotions you can bundle into it. How can we sing the Lord's song in a foreign land? If I forget you, Jerusalem, and my right hand forget its skill to play the harp. So why is this so important? Why is Jerusalem such an important part of it? And we get an insight into this in Jesus dealing with the woman at the well. Because in the interactions with her, she finally comes and asks this pointed question, and it gives us an insight into why this is so important in our context. She said to him, "Sir, I perceive you are a prophet. Our fathers worshipped in this mountain, and the Jews say that in Jerusalem is the place where one should worship." Right? And then Jesus dismantles the whole thing and says that, there's coming a time, and that time now is, that the Father is seeking those who will worship him in spirit and in truth, and not a place. Right? If you were a Jew, Jerusalem was the place of worship. And now that was gone for them in this context. If I do not remember you, let my tongue cling to the roof of my mouth. And if I do not exalt Jerusalem above my chief joy, is saying, the only way I can worship is if the temple in Jerusalem is there. And that should be my chief joy. The problem is they have missed something in here. And that's okay. It's okay to pray when you don't have the full revelation of what you're going through. And that's kind of the point of this song. We be, maybe out of step with God, maybe out of step with the understanding of what he's trying to do and accomplish in our own hearts. Last week, Joe brought, or 2 weeks ago, Joe brought to us this, Psalms of Joy and what this meant. And I'm going to recap some of those things that he brought to us. Our heart is glad when we trust in the Lord. Right? Whoever wrote this, Psalm 137, was struggling with trust. And again, I would say that's okay. Just acknowledge it. Right? For us, if we're having struggle in trust with something because we're in a situation we've never thought ourselves to be in, we can express that, and we'll talk about that in a little bit. And he also told us that joy is a product of faith, praise, and trust. Right? And he also told us it was a choice to be made, right? That it isn't something that just happens as a byproduct. Right? So that's something that we have to cultivate. And the more we cultivate it, the stronger and more resilient, our joy can be. And lastly, he said, choose to be joyful even in the face of unhappy circumstances. That's the choice that we have, but it's the choice based on that faith, praise, and trust. So if you missed it, or if you're not quite remember it, go back and watch it. It was really an excellent presentation on Joe's part. And here's what Joe alluded to when it came to Babylon last week. So in Habakkuk, he goes through what's happening with the Babylonian invasion. And this is what he says about joy. Though the fig tree does not bud, and there are no grapes in the vine, right? We might say there's no money in the bank, or there's no food on our table. Though the olive crop fails, and the fields produce no food, though there are no sheep in the pen and no cattle in the stall. Okay, he's covering it all, right? This is their situation in Babylon. They've got nothing that they had. Yet, I will rejoice in the Lord. I will be joyful in God my Savior. Habakkuk has come to the point where he doesn't need the temple in Jerusalem to worship. He can, in the face of it all, still rejoice in the Lord. He still has his faith, his trust, and his praise. Right? So that's kind of what the author of this Psalm 137 is missing. And hopefully they can capture it after they wrote that psalm. So again, in their resentment, they're remembering back when the temple and Jerusalem was being destroyed. Remember, O Lord, against the sons of Edom, the day of Jerusalem, who said, raise it to the very foundation. Right? So they're remembering the Edomites who, were akin to them, through, help me again, so it's, what was it? Lot? Okay, yeah, well, through Lot, and then, anyway, sorry, it's not a super relevant point. Oh, Esau, that's the one. Yeah, it was Esau, so, yeah, thank you. So, and then they go and say this, which is maybe one of the most difficult scriptures in the Old Testament to explain to somebody who doesn't quite understand the context of the Bible. O daughter of Babylon, who are to be destroyed, happy are the one who repays you as you have served us. And here it comes. Happy the one who takes your and dashes your little ones against the rock. Ooh, that's the ultimate in resentment, right? That is like rage. That is like everything that poisons the soul, except for maybe one thing here. We don't know for sure, but maybe the person who wrote this knows a little bit more. So in Isaiah, there's a prophecy against Babylon, Isaiah 13, and it talks about this very thing. Their children will be dashed to pieces before their eyes. So perhaps they know that the time is coming when Babylon is going to get its due. And maybe there's this dim glimmer of hope that they can return to their land, which again is prophesied in other areas. So you can see from this psalm, it doesn't matter what state you're in, you can still approach God in your just out and out anger. Even if your anger is misguided or whatever, as long as you're bringing it to Him and asking for help on His part, He can deal with it. So, bring all these emotions that you have, depression, despair, grief, whatever it may be, bring it to Him. The words of Jackie and these words I think are probably some of the most important words that I have incorporated into my heart. Feel what you feel, but go back to what you know. It's okay to feel the things. You shouldn't kind of just suppress the feelings because they're bad. Let God know what you're feeling, but also go back to what you know about God and what He's trying to do in your life and the promises He has for you, and the circumstances in your life where He delivered you. Right? Go back and recall those things in your life so that you can respond away to these emotions and gather up some courage, as Joe also talked about. Ask and share with others if you're struggling with this, and they can help bring you perspective. Right? That's what this is all about, is trying to regain the spiritual perspective that we should have. So start working towards joy. Father, my trust is wavering. Please work with me to build it up. Right? Just admit these things. We love this response to the man who wants his son healed. He says, he says, Jesus, I believe, but help my unbelief. Right? And Jesus honors that. And so our Father will honor that too. Say, I do trust in you, but my trust needs some help. I do believe that you're working all things for good. But, my pain is so intense, I'm having a hard time grasping that. I don't want to have this resentment. Show me how to drop it. Show me what's wrong. What's it take to get rid of this? Right? And He will answer all those things, whether it be, passages in His Word or by circumstances in your life. But you got to start working towards the joy by going back to what you know about your Father. All right, let's go and dive into Psalm 62, because this is a psalm of emotional recovery. And I'd really like to know how David wrote this psalm. Whether he's writing it in real time, or he's gone back and writing down what he was thinking, and how he worked through it. Excuse me. It's really kind of interesting, though, how he takes his circumstance and works through it. And the circumstances, they're not sure exactly what it is, but they think, the scholars think, that it's when Absalom, his son, rebels against him, takes some of his trusted commanders away with him, and David has to deal with all that turmoil. And if this is to be true, you got to think about it. I'm losing a son who I love, and as you go to the story, you see he's not really a great father with Absalom, and Absalom is kind of responding in a way to some of the way David has treated him, but it doesn't shake David's love for him. So he's got to deal with all these things. He's got to deal with betrayal and all this. But the way he deals with it first is he attempts to focus on God. He attempts to focus on what he knows about God. And then he shares how his anger is with his betrayers. So he attempts to focus, but the anger wells up. And he starts thinking about his betrayers, right? And then he's determined again to focus on God. And that's what this whole thing of feel what you feel and get back to what you know is about. You can go ahead and feel the anger and tell God about it, but get back to that determined focus on God. And then, having done that, he gets a proper perspective on his betrayers and how he decides he's going to deal with it. And then he finishes off this beautiful psalm by recalling wisdom and giving us some counsel as well. Okay, so let's dive into this. The first thing is, truly my soul silently waits for God. From him only comes my salvation. Now there's some things you may not have as we go through these first couple verses in your translations. But the word only should be in every one of these points that he goes through. So I have included it in here. But he is telling himself that, settle down, David. I'm going to silently wait for my God. Because from him only comes my salvation. My salvation isn't going to come from my army. It's not going to come from some other army who's going to take Absalom and these traitors away. Him only comes my salvation. He only is my rock and my salvation. He kind of adds to the salvation part. He's my rock, right? We could spend 15 minutes talking about what that is. He only is my defense. When this whole situation with Absalom started, David had to flee the temple. He couldn't defend himself against Absalom and those who rebelled against him. So he tells himself, he's my defense. It's not me and what I can do and what I can bring to bear on the situation. I shall not be much moved. Now, your translations may not get that, but I think it's important. What he's trying to do here is work himself into really building that trust in God back up through the emotions which kind of, shake us a bit when they happen. I shall not be much moved, right? I'm not there yet, but I'm almost there. And the reason I'm not there yet is because of these betrayers. And he's in his mind, he's talking to them, right? How long will you attack a man, being David himself? You shall all be slain, all of you. Justice, right? I want justice here. Like a leaning wall or a tottering fence. They only consult to cast him down from his high position. They tried to take over his kingship, right? They delight in lies. The people who I trusted, who were there in my courts, lied to my face. And they bless me with a mouth, but they curse me inwardly. So this is the thing that David comes back up and he's thinking through. And then we get this word that comes in. Selah. And that's a very interesting word. There's really a lot of debate as to what that might mean. But it certainly means, wait a second, pause, right? And, it's Amplified would say, pause and think calmly. So if you read the Amplified version of the Psalms, you will always see this in parentheses. Pause and calmly think. But there also is an element to this word, they think, and it's not for sure. But The word, whatever that salah is to praise. And salal is to lift up. So I think when we read it, we should read it as a pause and calmly think and set our minds towards praise. Okay, and that's exactly what David does here. He goes back to saying some of the same things he said in verse 1 and 2. But there's a little bit of a change to it. My soul waits silently for God alone. And this is a change, right? For he says, he is my salvation, right? But now he says, my expectation is from him alone. I'm not going to have expectations that I figure this out, that I'm going to remedy the situation. And in fact, he doesn't. But he changes it so that his expectation is solely on God to work this out. He alone is my rock and my salvation. He alone is my defense. Notice the change from the verse 2. I shall not be moved. The other one was, I should not be much moved. I will not be greatly moved. You know, some of your translations may say. It says, no, this time I'm setting my heart on God. And this is where it's going to be. So he takes the emotions of betrayal and anger and despair from the parent-child relationship, and he turns it all over to God. I don't know how you're going to work this out, but I trust you to work it out. In God is my salvation and my glory. This is something he adds on. The rock of my strength. And he's my refuge. My refuge is in God. Now David is, running through the wilderness here, seeking places to hide. And he knows how to do this because he did it from Saul. Because he went back and, to his former experiences where God delivered him from Saul's hand. But he says, these caves that I'm hiding in aren't my refuge. My refuge is really in God. Pause. Praise. Then stop and think calmly. Again, he does it here. And now he has perspective on the men who betrayed him and all the people who betrayed him. Surely men of low degree are a vapor, right? And that's what they were. Men of high degree are a lie. The men in this court, high degree, they were valued in his courts. They were high up on the totem pole of Israel. But men of high degree are a lie. In other words, I can't put my trust in them. I have to put my trust in God. If they are weighed on the scales, they are altogether lighter than vapor. Do not trust in impression. This is where he's kind of saying these things to himself, but also to us. Nor vainly hope in robbery is exactly what these men tried to do. And then he says, if riches increase, don't set your heart on it. Right? And riches in this case could be power. The desire for power, which Absalom had, the desire for power, obviously his counselors who betrayed him thought David's power was waning and they were going to hook into the new upcomer. But David says, don't set your heart on them. God has spoken once, and twice I have heard this, that power belongs to the Lord. Right? And that's an interesting way to put it. You see it in the New Testament when Jesus speaks, depending on your version. Verily, verily, I say unto you. So in the rabbinic form, they're saying, I'm saying this twice. I want you to pay attention to this. This is important. In your version, they say truly, truly. Right? That's what David is saying here. Verily, verily, power belongs to God. It doesn't belong to me. It doesn't belong to Absalom and those who betrayed. It only belongs to God. Also to you, O Lord, belongs mercy. Right? He says, I am in need of this, and that belongs to you. And you will render each one according to his work. You will render it. As king, he had absolute authority to render, unto these things. But you could see in David's life, there were times where he acted in mercy when he could have easily killed some people. Right? And he withheld, his sword against them. Because he knew, and he knows now, that mercy belongs to the Lord. And he is the one who will repay. So it's a pretty amazing psalm. And as you can use this as kind of a framework as to how to practice with your emotions. Just start with saying, silently I wait for God and attempt to focus on Him. And respond with things that you know He is, even if your emotions aren't quite in line, right? And then tell God what the issue is with your emotions. With David, it was the anger of his betrayers. For us, it may be our circumstances are crumbling before our eyes. But then bring it back again, Selah. Pause and think calmly. Bring perspective on the situation. And then go and recall things in the past and bring some counsel to yourself. So what we learned from these two Psalms, it gives us perspective on our emotions. It gives us perspective when, we're not in the place where we'd really like to be. And our emotions may be out of control, kind of like Psalm 137. But even in that vein, we still try to bring in promises of God into it. And they're trying to catch up with it. And that's okay. And God wants you to express those things to Him. And He will work it through if you let Him. Right? And then Psalm 62, I think, is the model recovery prayer. And scheme or schematic or flow, however you want to call it, to bring our emotions back into recovery. So let's close out with a worship. I almost thought about changing some of this to be, my life is in you, Lord, it's in